Today I'm going to share with you this entrepreneur's journey after 20 years in business to revitalize his business and find a new outlook on life. I'm going to be sharing with you what I've been doing in the last year. I'm going to share some books that I've been reading. I'm going to share some discoveries that I've made that really have nothing to do with business. And I'm telling you this today because it's my 39th birthday. And it's crazy how really now 20 years in business have gone by. And I've come to record every year these birthday addresses that aren't about how to get a passport, aren't about how to lower your taxes, but they're about life. Something that I think really impacts anyone who's a nomad capitalist, that there's a deeper meaning to why we do the things we do, and it's worth evaluating, and it's worth connecting with ourselves as humans. I've got a tease for you at the end that a lot of people have been asking about. I'm going to tell you what's coming up at the end. But a year ago, I sat here and I said, hey, I'm going to make fewer videos. Today is my 38th birthday. And today is the beginning of the end of an era. This is the beginning of the end of my daily appearances on YouTube. Perhaps not everyone understood. Perhaps I wasn't clear. There was a point last year where it got frustrating for some of the reasons I'm going to talk to you about today, and I hope you'll take something away from this, that I said making 30 videos every month, it became intense. Because even though I go around and I constantly have ideas and I'm writing ideas down, even sometimes while we're making videos, I'll come up with 1 or 2 ideas and I'll just throw those in and we'll just roll with it. It was a lot. And I said, I want to bring in some of the people in the team because as our company's grown, they know more than I do. We've done that now. We're here basically every other day, and on the opposite days, the Nomad Capitalist R&D channel is up. You should check that out. We talk from the team's perspective about actual stuff that they're doing with our clientele. And so I talked a year ago about something that I had taken years to kind of put together and taken years to get comfortable talking about. Difficulties growing up and how that impacted me and how it still impacts me. And I'll tell you what, I watch a lot of successful entrepreneurs, and I think a lot of great people have a chip on their shoulder. And that connects to what we do here at Nomad Capitalist, because I think that perhaps those people are more likely to have the push to go out and do what we do. They're the ones who say, you know what, screw it. I'm going to go out and go where I'm treated best. And it's harnessing that energy while also respecting that you want to be happy in your life. You want to be on a mission, but you want to enjoy the journey. That really motivated me to talk to you about that last year. And so people thought, oh, he's leaving forever. But here's what I did. I took 5 months and I spoke to probably only about 4 or 5 people in the company. And I said, I'm going to go and work on very macro level stuff. I'm not going to sit around and manage little stuff every day. People have come in and they're going to do that. I'm going to check in with them. They're going to give me a monthly debrief. And I'm going to work on what needs to change in the business to fulfill the mission that I have to empower global citizenship, as well as to enjoy life. And so I took 5 months. I won't say I took it off because it's really hard for me to turn off my brain from all things business. But I was able to connect with what it is that I do and why others do it. And I spent a lot of time traveling. I told you I went to pretty much all the tax-friendly countries in Europe, some I hadn't been to in a while. Got back to my R&D roots, started taking meetings about various projects and started to figure out how do I want to improve everything we do in terms of R&D. And I just envisioned where things wanted to be. And that came with some really intense conversations with myself. During that time, someone reached out to me and said, hey, I sell businesses. Do you want to sell your business? And I passed that along to someone who was involved in the business, and they went down the rabbit hole and there were some numbers discussed. And there's a part of me that said, there's some days this is frustrating. But then I thought about it more, and I went back and I realized that we have a business that is probably better than most businesses out there. It's not fixed in a particular location. It doesn't rely on lots of staff, particularly untrained staff. You don't have to have, I ran a pool business for a year and a half. I invested in a pool business. I would need hundreds and hundreds of people working for me to do what we do at Nomad Capitalist. I mean, just there'd be no other way. And that sounds frustrating, right? People in the West say, nobody wants to work anymore. Imagine hiring 500 people. It can run pretty much anywhere with very light tax. It can run online. I mean, you can hire people from anywhere in the world. I mean, there's just a lot of benefits to this. So what is it that is frustrating? And I plugged into that and I said, and I went back through some of the people that I've liked working with the most over the years. And they're people I realized who maybe they sold a business at one point, but they stuck it out. And then I looked at people where it was more frustrating, and the goal was the exit. The exit was the ego stroke. And I said to myself, one of the things I watched a lot when I was in this 5 months, I started watching a lot of Warren Buffett clips. May not agree with everything he says politically, but went on a deep dive of all things Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. And I realized that for them, the flex is still running the same thing at 92 and 99 years old. Maybe the flex is you keep going and you persevere. And so I uncovered in some personal development work something called the polyvagal system, which the polyvagal is basically 3 parts. You have the ventral, where you're just feeling happy and open and just in a normal state in your body and your mind. You have the fight or flight in the middle, and I started to notice how often I would go down into somebody would say the wrong thing, or someone would attack, or someone would do whatever, and how often you go down in fight or flight in your business. And then at the bottom, there's the dorsal, where you just freeze. And I started paying attention to how often, whenever I talked to certain folks, and I started thinking back to when I would talk to certain folks, how often would you freeze? And I'd realize I really love what I'm doing, but there's times when you have people in your life that put you in that fight or flight more than others. There's times when, certain situations, certain people put you in that freeze. And one of the great books I read was called The 6 Types of Working Genius. I don't mind doing 15 hours a day, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. I get really into it, but there's certain things that we're all good at. There's 2 types of working genius we're great at. We're almost never burn out. I read that. I realized, my 2 types of working genius, when I do that, I never burn out. I just go and go and go. I get so much done. And when I'm doing the stuff that I don't like, and I've got people who are difficult, I go down into this fight or flight mode, and you kind of get, or then you go down to the freeze mode, the dorsal. And sometimes I'm like, I thought back, I would spend 2 hours sometimes just frozen because something happened. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I really started to go back and look at, what is it I want to do with my business and with my life? Because there's a part of me that said, here I am, I'm 1 year away from being 40 years old. I've been working my entire life. I said, there has to be something, not beyond working the 15-hour days, but beyond, I realized that fight or flight and that freeze where stuff happens that's frustrating and you get stuck there. And I realized if I could fix that, the answer is to be Warren Buffett. The answer is not to be the cocky, bro-y guy who starts something, he's always trying to sell it. Like, that's the reason for starting the business. I didn't start this as a business. We had our 10-year anniversary party earlier this year in January in Istanbul. And I realized a lot of businesses don't make it to 10 years. They certainly don't make it to where we are in 10 years with the financial success and the notoriety and having impacted people. I said, why would you want to go? If you didn't start it to exit, why would you want to keep going to exit? I suppose there's a number for everybody. Why would you do that? I kind of thought the ultimate flex is just you just run it forever. I started during this time, as I'm having these thoughts, as I'm watching all this Warren Buffett, as I'm learning about the polyvagal and kind of understanding in my body where I'm at and what is it that lets me go and love what I'm doing, and what is it that causes me to stop and fight and flight and freeze. I basically would wake up every day and I would read books and I would take, endless notes about what it is I wanted to improve in the business and what it is I wanted to improve in myself that would hopefully make me enjoy better. But I understand I'm a guy motivated by business. And I think we have a great business that actually does things. Imagine, nothing wrong with running a pool company, but you're not changing people's lives to the extent that we are. When I see people at Nomad Capitalist Live who come up and say how deeply we've impacted them. And I said, it's hard for me to give up on those people. I started reading a great book, Principles, Ray Dalio. Some of you have read this book. One of the things I noticed is I started to read this, and I'm going to talk about some of the people and some of the frustrations in a minute that kind of put me in this position where I wanted to kind of reevaluate everything. I often felt over the years, one of the biggest things that put me into fight or flight was you'd have people working for you or working around you, maybe third parties, who would question what you're doing. There's certain places in the world that we have hired, maybe more historically, where people are just more open and they're more, willing to get in your face and not always in the nicest of ways. And it really impacted me at times because I felt like, well, there's 6 different people who are all like, you're crazy, that's not how it can work. And this was the first book that I read, Ray Dalio's Principles, and I kept finding myself, the beginning was a little dry for me, but as I got into the real meat of it, I'm like, every single thing he was saying, I'm like, yeah, I kind of said that in a way. And it was cathartic for me to realize, like, here's a multi-billionaire who's basically saying stuff. Now, we kind of shared the same philosophy. And my favorite one was radical transparency. And that's the way I've always tried to run the business, especially internally, is here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's what's going on. This was the first book that was really cathartic about seeing that stuff that people around me, and people who weren't even in the business, old friends, for example, people in the family, say, why are you doing that for? And I read Ray Dalio, and I'm like, that's great. Another book I don't have here is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. One of the things he said about that is if you build the staff in your business at the beginning, if you get the staffing foundations wrong, you may never be able to recover. And I can think back, I spent some time thinking back to exactly how I felt many, many years ago when there was kind of a mutiny in the company among the first like 4 people who just became extraordinarily demanding, and it was kind of all about them and just kind of acted as if I was irrelevant to the business. What a great business that you can overcome something that Peter Thiel says may be fatal, that you can just have the wrong people. And unfortunately, it took me too long to learn about the right people. Other book I read was The Tao of Pooh. There's also now The Tay of Piglet. And for me, if you're doing something that's hard charging in business, this was really helpful because it kind of puts everyone in the character of someone from Winnie the Pooh. And I started noticing people in my life who were like, oh, she's kind of like Piglet. And oh, he's kind of, she's kind of like Tigger. Oh, he's Eeyore. And maybe you want less Eeyore in your life. And I thought to myself, am I Rabbit, who's neurotic and bouncing all over the place? Am I Owl, maybe, who's kind of lecturing people with wisdom all the time? And I realized that the goal is we should all try and be a little bit more like Pooh and just accept things as they are. So that was helpful. Read The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. Interesting book that kind of fueled thoughts about business. Another great cathartic book was Your Next 5 Moves by Patrick Bet-David. We had him on the channel a couple years ago. Endless markings. You can just see the whole book is marked up. And I have an iPad. I have a bunch of books on the iPad, and I also have a ton of audiobooks. Probably went through 150 books. Didn't finish them all. But this is one I did finish, and I circled and I underlined so many things again here that if you're an entrepreneur, use your haters and doubters to drive you. That's something we talked about last year. One thing we've realized this year, we brought in a couple people, and they call them the 8%. We look at, for example, Nomad Capitalist Live. There's 5 to 8% of folks who are just like, I'm not sure I like this guy. I don't know why they're coming, but use your haters and doubters to drive you. But this also talks about, things that you as the entrepreneur are going to do. And what I'll come back to in a minute, kind of what I realized about strength. But it started with this book. The Alice of Happiness, this is a good one. I went back and kind of paged through the Geography of Bliss, which I read many, many years ago. One thing I try to really connect with is, where are people happy? You want happier people around you. There are certain places where certain cultures, people are just kinder. I think Malaysia and Indonesia is right in there, Colombia to a large extent. I got this book. This is actually a short movie now, I think on Apple TV, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. One of the things that I found, the point I was making earlier, if you're in hard charging business, it was important for me to reconnect with, perhaps you can call them some soothing techniques. But if you're doing hard charging stuff, if you got people, competitors, just different negativities in life, for me, a soothing element was do something that's almost a little childish. And yet I watched this movie and then I got the book. And it kind of reinforced some thoughts that I had about, what are we here for? Kind of reinforced some thoughts about what a lot of people in the business world think, that you have to be tough. You have to want to attack people. And I like to win. I'm an extremely competitive person. But what I realized, this combined with the principles. Here's from the book. What do you think success is? Asked the boy. The boy is talking to a mole sitting on a ledge. And the mole said, to love. And there's a lot of stuff like that. There's a story about, the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse that spoke to me because it talks about wanting to have a home. I think there are people who are watching this who maybe identify with what I talked about last year and not feeling like they have a home. And you just want to find a home. And I realize that's one of the underlying reasons for some people doing this, is you want to find somewhere where you are accepted. You want to find a culture. And I realized when we've had people come up to me and say, hey, I moved to Colombia, for example, thanks to you, and I met my wife, and I never really went on many dates where I'm from, but I started dating because I just felt a new lease on life. And I realized that's a person who didn't feel at home where they're from, but deep down wanted to love. And when you strip through a lot of the stuff we do, that still has to be there. And I think that what the people who don't realize what Nomad Capitalist is about, they use, pejorative terms. They call it, it's tax bracket tourism. And the reality is, I think that a lot of people who are in my position, who are living at least the version of this life that I do, they want to find acceptance. They want to find love. They want to be able to love. They feel like if they could be loved and they can have that fulfillment that maybe they just didn't feel connected to. And when I say, maybe we're not all born in the right place, maybe we're not all born at the right time, but we can't fix that. There's something deeper that I started to connect with. And so one of the principles we established in our company is we're going to be kind. It doesn't mean we're not going to have boundaries, but we want to practice not niceness, but kindness, because we want to seek that. And I kind of really connected with, there's a deeper meaning to the stuff that we do. People think, oh, just to save a few bucks, they're going to leave. No, I left to seek kindness, love. And with that, I realized all of the other benefits. Now, if you just want to move and you want to save money, I hope that wherever you go, you're able to love. But that was something that hit me. Here was the last one, and I've mentioned there's other ones. Went through The Sovereign Individual, went through 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, so many great books. This was one that kind of speaks to what I talked about last year, and I listened to this first. Remember, I was crossing a bridge in Lucerne, Switzerland, one of my low-tax places. And speaking of where you're from and wanting to love, I heard a statement that really hit me in the book. Seems a little bit obvious if you think about it. And he was talking about setting boundaries. He was talking about extreme boundaries. And he said, there are some people who feel isolated, so isolated, they want to move to another country. That's an example of an extreme boundary. And it was pretty emotional for me because I believe in the stuff we talk about. I've always been pretty libertarian. And yet I realize, again, what's one of the things that perhaps motivates people to go from just being angry and just sitting around talking about stuff and talking about libertarian ideals or whatever it is that motivates you, business ideals, where they're from. And what motivates people to action is this sense of perhaps some people want to seek the emotional connection they think they don't have. And so healing your lost inner child, that was a pretty good one. One thing I started to realize, I started to connect with my own abilities and my own talent. I didn't grow up getting a lot of praise, and I think that I probably not only need to be better at that myself, but I realized I always kept pushing in business to reach the next level, thinking that's where praise was. And as a result, I lost sight of what I contributed. And as a result of that, I would compound the problem where, because you don't think you're as good as you are, you bring in people to surround you in some cases who perhaps perpetuate that. And they don't want to tell you. And they want to almost downplay what you're doing. I always thought, hey, if I can do this, anybody can do this. And I started to realize, there's certain things that I'm terrible at, by the way. Anything athletic, anything musical, probably most dance, I'm pretty bad at all that. But the stuff we do in this business, I'm pretty good at. And I realized somebody in our company recently said, our company's historically had a low self-esteem. There's some companies, you don't want to be a company that has this arrogance about you. Is it Pretty Woman, she goes to the Prada store and they're so rude to her, she buys more Prada to convince them she's okay. You don't want to be that. And I think certainly in some parts of the world, there's less of a differentiation between confidence and arrogance. But I started to realize, the company doesn't always set boundaries. And there are people who push back, right? If you want to work with Nomad Capitalist, we want you to have a certain income. We want you to have a certain net worth. We did not always define what does it mean to have a $1 million net worth. I figured you have $1 million in the bank. I don't want it to be your company value. Obviously, if you have a very valuable company, that's important. But what was interesting is the areas where we can improve generally got worked out. The areas where I thought we did a decent job were folks where they pushed on that boundary. Who are you to say who you work with? And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what's in that for you at the end of this presentation. But I realized that the company had this certain lack of ability to set boundaries at times because I had the same thing, because I struggled with this. And there was a part of me that said, that kind of connected with the idea that I didn't want to have higher self-esteem, or I was afraid to have higher self-esteem in the same way a lot of comedians are afraid to
be less angry because I think they'll be less funny. I thought it would stop me from having drive. There's kind of that, I don't know if it's a chip on your shoulder, maybe it is. But I went back and I looked because it was always so hard for me to give myself credit for anything. It was always like when I get to the next level. I mean, I finished writing my book the first time in 2018, and the next day it's like, well, that's over. Well, are you going to talk about the book? My friend said, I did it. It's over. What's there to talk about? It's like, well, you should be proud of it. I'm like, I wrote a book. It's over. There was never a moment of celebrating. And in fact, this last year for our 10th anniversary, I had to kind of push those 4 and 5 people that I talked to. They never even planned a party. I said, I'm glad we're not the company that spends the entire year before the 10th anniversary party with 20 people thinking about only the party, but we should have a party. We should celebrate 10 years. Millions of people watching what we're doing, millions of people impacted. And I realized that I had set a tone for not wanting to ever take credit for anything, for not wanting to pat myself on the back. Occasionally, like a comedian, you'd make kind of a sarcastic comment and overemphasize your accomplishments, but you didn't really believe it. I realized that there was a little bit of that in the company. I still believe that overall the company's done very well and served a lot of people well. And you look at, in the last 18 months or so, 97% of people are happy with the execution of their plans. But it could have been better. Maybe a few more people should have been unhappy because we should have said no to certain things. And again, I don't want, not to make it so much about the business, but for my own life, I realized there are a few people I've surrounded myself with that I kind of keep surrounding myself with people who don't want to follow a boundary because I'm not taking credit. So I spent some time and I said, okay, what is it that I'm good at? And I went back and said, okay, all these people who have been here for like many, many years, like you trained them, they're smart and they worked hard and you helped, create them. And that's worth something. And so I said, okay, how can I contribute better to that? Okay, we have the Nomad Academy training program. I made some videos for that the last year. We're going to beef up the Nomad Academy training program. We're going to have me and a few other top leaders. We're going to make the world's best onboarding program of any company. And we've done that. We've started to get feedback from people who are in their 30s and 40s saying, I've never seen such a good onboarding. Because I realized when I teach people what to do, oftentimes, and the stuff that I know what to do, it works well. And I just started going through each different thing and realizing, what are my strengths and my weaknesses? And it was hard to admit what are my strengths. And that kind of led me to looking at the team that we had. Not necessarily the customer service people, but like people who were in more managerial positions. Because I'd always thought like, oh, the pinnacle is you get somebody who worked at a big investment company or something. You get somebody who, they had a fancy title over here. There's still that part of me that, I was 15 and I was reading the Wall Street Journal. I would always read about, the CEO and the CFO and all these different people at these big corporations. And I thought, oh yeah, that's real business. And I came to realize, I've always kind of realized, I realized it more this last year, like that's not even real business. I don't know if I could be the CEO of Unilever, but I bet there's a lot of functions of that kind of job that people who work at this company can do. Not maybe the corporate and governance stuff, but I looked at some of these corporations. I looked at the people we hired from corporations, not that many of them. And I realized these people would like take 3 months to get anything done. I had thought because, I wasn't confident. I mean, generally speaking, I would just push through and demand people get things done quickly. But there'd be occasionally times when you bring in the fancy guy, you'd be like, oh, okay, well, I guess it takes 3 months, like you know better than I do. And I kind of realized, not to be arrogant, like, no, they don't know better than you do. People who build stuff, people who innovate, people who create, there's something special about that above people who just go and perform a very defined function. And so I went through and I started thinking, like, everyone who uses these fancy words like audience mapping and performance improvement plans, like all these kind of buzzwords that I started here, and I went back and thought, like, I've heard that so many times, like these people didn't invent this. They just kind of repeat the stuff. Go to market strategy. I got off LinkedIn because I realized, like, this is pretty toxic. Just a bunch of like people who don't want to work and just like whining, like no matter what you do. And there's some good stuff on there. One of the things I innovated with our HR team is like, make a decision in 7 days. Don't ghost people. Like we already had that before I left, but like make decisions faster. But anyway, I just spent this time kind of evaluating, like, wait a second, if I'm good at this stuff, why am I listening to people like trying to shame me for like, no, you don't understand. It has to take longer. I just thought like, oh, well, they must be more knowledgeable than I am. And what I realized was so many people, I always internally, and with people who know me, I wore my heart on my sleeve and said, like, here's what I need. Here's what I think of it. It's radical transparency, maybe too radical. And I figured like, hey, they have some level of transparency too. And I realized, no, A lot of these people, they use, having worked at, Prada could be an example. We don't have anyone from Prada, but they worked at some fancy company, and like that's what they own. And it's kind of like people who own, I'm an American. And that's why they can't ever say that something's wrong with the United States, because if that was wrong, their one label would be gone. They'd have no identity. And I realized with this kind of corporate haughtiness and the desire to go to meetings, and I don't think we ever got so bad here that it was like Unilever, where people just never did anything but go to meetings. There was always someone trying to push us in that direction, and me trying to pull them back. And I realized these people, many of them are deeply insecure. They have a weakness that they're afraid of, and they know it. Or maybe they feel it deep down, but they don't wear it on their sleeve the way I do. And I felt like, well, they must have it all together. And it took me building up my self-esteem and realizing, we have a pretty good thing going here. And I'm going to take some credit for building that. Obviously, so many other people have done it as well. But I said, okay, April, I'm going to be day-to-day again. And I'm going to get my hands really dirty with some of the stuff that I've learned. I'm going to be kind, but I'm going to be firm. We're going to set clear boundaries. And so I started in the marketing department. Within 90 days, we turned it from a disorganized mess, from what some corporate people had done, where they talked to their, I think in 3 months, someone talked to like one of the head sub-managers like twice. And they're like, we should cancel Nomad Capitalist Live. It's January. Who wants to go to Malaysia? We had one of the most successful events, probably the most successful event ever. It took 90 days of just getting in deep and creating systems and creating processes and being extremely granular and doing all the stuff that before the fancy people were like, why do you care what color the spreadsheet is? I said, you're going to see. And I came back and I said, I'm not taking any nonsense. And we had to let a few people go. And we had to promote a few people and lift them up. And it took about 90 days and we got it organized. And then I went into sales and I realized that lack of self-esteem that I had perhaps helped create means there were some people who were successful that our people weren't connected with. And there were some people that maybe shouldn't have been here that they were connecting with. They certainly weren't setting boundaries when someone, started to yell and scream that how dare you have a requirement to work with you. There should be no boundaries. And that goes back to that 8% of people that we've realized, like, okay, there's 8% of people who, in probably any business, are going to be difficult. But I learned to deploy empathy, realizing the stuff that I'd gone through and what brought me to this journey myself, and realizing that other people may have that. But it doesn't mean you have to accept them. You can love them. You can wish them the best. But you have to have boundaries. And now to strategy, making the plans. And we're dramatically improving the look of the plans. We're dramatically improving some of the details. And we've got 10 ideas on the shelf for how to add new stuff to the plans we create, your bespoke plan. Did a tremendous amount of work with the HR team and really talented person there. And, making sure we have the right people, but really making sure it reflects kind of what my goal was when I had the end of kind of getting a few of those things in line. I had a meeting with a lot of the new people. We got rid of a few folks I just didn't enjoy working with. They put me in the fight or flight. They put me in the freeze. And they didn't do it. I did it to myself. But associate talking to them kind of was uncomfortable because you always felt pushback. You always felt like you're less than. And I guess at one point I thought I deserved that. And maybe the 8% of people think I do. I came back and I said, listen, I'm not here to make every dollar possible. We make probably more money than people think we do. But I said, I'm going to let go of that. Not always is it a competitive advantage for people to kind of look down at you. But, it's not about that. I think I'd always wanted people to notice more our success because it was something that I was never told I had before. I was told a lot, as a young adult, you're pretty untalented. And I realized, what? I'm going to give myself credit for that. I said, we're going to make as much money as we ethically can, as long as we do so where people are happy here. That includes me. I don't care if someone here is the most talented person in what they do. I don't care if they've been here for a long, long time or whatever it is. We have to all get along. That's the number one thing. And you know what the funny part about that is I think when you say, hey, we're not going to chase after every dollar and we're going to put, some level of enjoyment first, because after 20 years, I look back and say, I wish I would have, I've enjoyed plenty of things, but I wish I would have enjoyed it more. I don't want to make the same mistake for the next 20 years just to, add an extra few bucks. My father said, well, if it all stopped tomorrow, could you survive it? Yeah, I'll be more than fine. That was the lesson. And it seems pretty obvious. And I'm sure some people will say that's pretty obvious. And yet all these and many more books it's not so easy to give yourself credit sometimes. And I think especially people who are talking about the stuff we're talking about, the Nomad Capitalist way, we want to get in touch with why we're here. Listen, maybe some people will do that. I think we've had some people in the past who've gotten in touch with why they're here and they realize they don't really care about saving taxes and they go and do their own thing. And if I've helped to play a part in that, great. I'd rather someone realize, what they really need if it's not to go where you're treated best. But for me, this, time, when people thought last year, he's going away forever, that was never the intention. It was to spend time working on the business in a very deep way and learning what needs to be innovated. And I think that includes, what do you need to change in your own life? It involved changing some people. It involved changing a bit of my mindset. It involved changing an entire perspective. And I think a lot of it revolved around what a lot of us could hear who are entrepreneurs. We don't have enough people in our corner saying, you're right. You're good. And especially for people like myself, who you're in cross-cultural situations where maybe that's not the way other cultures address it, is telling you, oh yeah, you did a good job. They keep it inside more. And you're like, well, they're not saying it. I must not be doing a good job. So that's what I've spent the last year doing. And I think it's been incredibly impactful. But the funny part of that I was going to mention is when you do that, that's when things actually take off. Every single time I've stepped back from, just detached from the outcome, things actually end up better. That's not why you do it, but I think things actually end up better financially when you try and kind of detach from the financial outcome. One of the things I also realized is there's a lot of people who watch this who aren't sure where to start. We can't really make, there's no scaled down version of a bespoke offshore plan. Like, we give you a plan, but we leave half the stuff you should do out. I mean, it's just not really doable. We're going to be talking about, in the next 6 weeks or so, something that I've been working on for a while now. It's going to help people who aren't that $500,000 a year above income, who aren't at the 7-figure net worth level. Stay tuned. Go to nomadcapitalist.com/email. Get in the email list. We're going to be announcing some stuff coming up later this year. For those of you who have asked, what do I do if I'm not your client yet? We have Nomad Capitalist Live, the live event. We had a great event in Kuala Lumpur. Jim Rogers, a lot of great people. Really, to the point of running a business and living a life that brings joy, it was the best. I think from the guest perspective, it was the best. Because we moved the location to Asia, it wasn't quite the biggest, but we came very close. More VIPs, I think a great group of people. And so that's something you can do, but I understand not everybody can come to that. And so I want you to stay tuned, because I think that, we do our best work in wanting to serve other people when we feel comfortable for ourselves. And I think that's probably something a lot of people who are living the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle could take from, that we need to be full in order to, best deliver the mission. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. I hope this has been helpful. It has been a productive year for me. And I hope this also answers the questions about people saying, what is Andrew doing? Hope it helps you understand what we're doing here at Nomad Capitalist, and I hope you can take something from that and apply that to your own business, and know that if you have some of these feelings and you're not getting what you'd like to get, if people don't understand you because you're in business, because you're a global citizen, I understand. And I hope you can take something of value from this.